From September of 1864 to March of 1865, the Confederates witnessed the fall of Atlanta, Sherman's march to the sea, Hampton Roads Peace Conference had failed, and then the last port of Wilmington had been closed down. And basically the Confederacy only existed in the distance between the armies at that point. And in March of 1865, Lee would try a last offensive to break through. And that's where we're going to go today, here in Petersburg, Virginia, at Fort Stedman. John B. Gordon, known for his tenacity, his aggressiveness, and a real fine commander, was out here at Petersburg, Virginia, and Lee held a council with him. The question was what to do. At this point, there was desperation, and John B. Gordon came up with the idea that they could either retreat, they could ask for peace, or they could try to break through. After counseling with Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee really didn't have much of a choice. If he attacked this point at Fort Stedman, then perhaps the Union Army, who was already 2-1 on the Confederate Army, would bring their troops in to a more tighter location, which maybe would give a little bit of a chance for Lee to escape and make his way to North Carolina unimpeded. So from this point at Colquitt Salient, John B. Gordon, March 25th, 1865, selected his men and brought them up here to this hill, and about 200 yards distance from where I'm standing now, attacked Fort Stedman. So I'm out behind the Confederate Defense Works right now at Colquitt Salient. The plan for John B. Gordon was he was going to have a line of men go in waves. So he would have one line faking desertion, and those men would overwhelm the pickets, and then another line of men with axes would come through onto the batteries and take the battery position. Then the main line would overwhelm the fort, and then the cavalry would come through right after that, and the cavalry would take the position and then spread down the line from there to split the army and to force their way through. At 4 a.m. early in the morning, March 25th, 1865, the Confederates massed up roughly 10,000 soldiers, and they tramped up this hill here, the same direction that I'm going right now. Axemen out front, and attacked the men. There were 4 deployed from the fort. They were supposed to be the lookout, the warning, the pickets. And the only sound that could be heard was the sound of tramping feet. And then shortly thereafter, there were soldiers running back towards the fort yelling that the rebels were coming. And the fort got ready. And with that single shot in the morning, John B. Gordon led his men through this attack. I'm at the 10th Battery, roughly the location of the 10th Battery in front of Fort Stedman. That morning, when the attack came, this battery was only able to get off about two shots before it fell. And then Fort Stedman's cannons, they had 4 cannons inside there, and they were only able to get off about 12 rounds before the fort was taken and the cannons were turned. let's talk a little bit about the fort itself. Fort Stedman had up to 6 guns at a time and roughly 300 soldiers garrisoned within this fort. That was typical of the size of a fort along the lines here in Petersburg. There was roughly 30 to 31 different forts garrisoned along the lines for the Union Army here in Petersburg for the siege. Now where I'm walking right now is Fort Stedman itself. I'm inside the walls of Fort Stedman behind the battery. And they have the 4 cannons placed here. So it kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of the direction the cannons would have been and where the Confederates would have attacked. There was a drummer boy by the name of Isaiah Jameson, and he recalled the panic-stricken men during the fight that morning, saying that the officers were panicked and they were coming up to the tents and banging on their tents with swords, yelling at them, "For God's sakes, men, fall in or we'll all be prisoners." Now just over my shoulder here, my left shoulder, off in the distance, an all Pennsylvania unit was out there. And as the Confederates were coming across attacking, the all Pennsylvania unit was sort of new and fresh to this, and that unit ends up falling back. A lot of the men that were involved in the attack that day in that direction just over my shoulder were also part of the failed Battle of the Crater that happened just a few months prior to this position here at Fort Stedman. Now a little bit of battlefield orientation. Off in the distance over in this direction is Colquitt Salient. Fort Stedman is right in front of those trees right there. Coming across this field here to where I'm standing here is Fort Haskell. Now if you can't tell, looking at the field rolling up in this direction, it's rolling hills. It's a pretty rough angle for a soldier to come across, especially the distance that has to be covered and cannons and carbines fired at you in the entire way. Where I'm standing now is Fort Haskell, and on the morning of March 25th, 1865, across this field right behind me here, Confederate soldiers were coming in this direction. The officer in charge of this position, however, had a premonition that the Confederates were coming to attack. So he had already had his men ready to go. And by the time the attack started to roll over this field here and into that direction, he already had everybody up and ready and was firing cannons in the direction of that fort. As the Confederates were pouring in this direction to try to take this fort, they were raking them with their cannon fire across that field behind me there. But Union soldiers off in the opposite direction, directly over here, thought that the Confederates had taken this fort. So they started firing cannons at this fort. They mustered up a color guard, sent the color guard up. 4 of the men from the guard actually fell wounded, but the flags worked. The cannon fire stopped, and they continued to fight from this direction, pouring it into the Confederates as they were coming from Fort Stedman. Eventually, the Confederates were surrounded on all 3 sides of Fort Stedman, and by 7 a.m., John B. Gordon had received word from Robert E. Lee that he could retreat back to Colquitt Salient. Just over my shoulder here is the deadly field where Fort Stedman is, and off in the trees in the distance is Colquitt Salient. At about 7 a.m., the Confederates had a choice. They could either stay put or they could retreat. If they stay put, they're going to get attacked anyhow. If they go across that deadly field, they're probably going to be attacked on all 3 sides and take their chances. One such man was Captain Joseph Carson. Coming out from that fort and going across that field, he discovers the body of his brother Bob. The night before the attack, Bob actually feared his brother's death, and wanting to make sure that he could bring his brother back to the line, he joins the attack. But he wasn't so lucky. Bob was the one that died. Their mother has already lost 2 sons, and with help from friends, Joseph brought the body of Bob back to Colquitt Salient, and his mother will now mourn another son lost to the Civil War. I hope you've enjoyed the tour here at Fort Stedman at Petersburg National Battlefield. This would be Lee's last offensive, and shortly thereafter there would be a breakthrough, eventually leading to the armies making their way to Appomattox, and peace agreements and talks throughout the country would end the Civil War. Hope you've enjoyed it, and if you like the videos, please hit like and subscribe. Have a good day.